Okay, hopefully you all can see that. Is that looking good for
Looks great.
everyone? Yep. Great. Okay. Well, so this talk that I'm excited to share with you all today is called Connection is Health, Reconnecting Agriculture, Planetary, and Human Health. And I'm very grateful to Ryan for helping me prepare and put this all together. And hopefully he's feeling better soon. And so going back for a moment to think about what it means, this phrase, connection is health, I want to let that sink in for a moment. And to understand that better, we can also collectively brainstorm or envision examples of disconnection leading to negative, sometimes unintended consequences. So what happens when we disconnect systems or don't recognize important connections when we break them? Um, so I want you all to think about that for a second. And one example that immediately jumps to mind for me in the food system is the disconnection between plants and animals. The majority of farming operations today raise either plants or animals, one or the other, leading to the need to grow feed for those animals, which we do in a pretty chemical intensive monoculture way, which turns out to be worse in quality than the natural alternative, often native grasslands. We raise animals in confinement, which makes them easily sick. So we feed them antibiotics constantly, and create huge manure management problems. Meanwhile, for the vegetables, they're lacking nutrients that they used to get for free from animal manures and life in the soil, and they now require nutrients delivered via chemicals that are energy intensive to manufacture and weaken the natural immune systems of plants, creating a cycle of dependency with externalities on the environment and human health. So there's a really lovely quote by a farmer and researcher, Helen Atto, that is when you kill something in the system, you inherit its job. So we've inherited a lot of jobs in farming by killing life forms that were in the system playing important roles. And we're going to think about reconnecting these systems that ripple up from the soil to human health in our time together today. So if anything else immediately comes to mind for you all, I would love to invite you to pop that in the chat of examples of disconnection in the food system or the healthcare system or the food system healthcare system relationship. And maybe we'll turn to those in our discussion a little bit later. So, and to kind of flip this and bring in an example of reconnection, a reconnection moment in a local food system that resulted in improved health outcomes from another tumultuous time in world history about 80 years ago, I want to bring in an example and a story of the experience of the British during World War II. So, when the island was blockaded from mainland imports, people feared mass starvation. And the scientific advisor to the Ministry of Food at the time launched a campaign promoting Dig for Victory gardens. He limited sugar availability while promoting more nutritious foods through the rationing system. There was a mandated return to more whole wheat bread. He encouraged people to bake a wartime loaf, which was starting to become less common at the time as people moved away from whole grains and white flour was becoming popular. So these loaves retain more vitamins and minerals. And in this time of hardship and crisis, the British population actually had lower maternal and infant mortality, lower rates of childhood anemia, and diet-related diseases declined across the population. And it was around this time, or actually a little bit earlier in the 1930s, when a British doctor concerned about the growing prevalence of white flour and the degrading English diet having a negative impact on his patients, lamented the fact in one of his books that his medical training did not include more about the effects of agricultural practices on food. So not just more training about food and nutrition, but training on how that food was grown. So it's all connected. Um, so let's see, I will bring in this quote from Wendell Berry that is where the title of our talk comes from. Only by restoring the broken connections can we be healed. Connection is health. And what our society does its best to disguise from us is how ordinary, how commonly attainable health is. We lose our health and create profitable diseases and dependencies by failing to see the direct connections between living and eating, eating and working, working and loving. So with that, the outline for the rest of our about 40 minutes or so is to discuss what is conventional agriculture and summarize the well-documented impacts on the environment and health, and then talk about agroecology as a framework for food production that's revitalizing people and planetary health. We'll look at agroecology in practice through some case studies of farms in our Climate Farm School network. So we're going to see a lot of pictures of farms today. And then we'll end with a discussion a little bit around an action plan for doctors. How can we integrate this information into the food system and healthcare system? And we'll end with some time for Q&A as well. Okay, so what is conventional agriculture? Essentially food production that is characterized by monocropping and landscape simplification, genetic uniformity, so growing a small number of crops or often just one crop over a large acreage, and one variety of that crop. Animals raised in confinement, as I mentioned, in concentrated animal feeding operations, agrochemical use, and that includes fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all the sides, and heavy tillage. So turning the soil, plowing, releasing a lot of the soil life and carbon back into the atmosphere. That is kind of the defining points. It's more capital intensive and machine intensive than labor intensive. So you have these large farms with one person operating them often. So why do we have this system? What are the benefits? There is definitely an overwhelming emphasis on yields, on solving hunger, on the Green Revolution, which was also happening at the time of the quotes that I referred to in the story of the British, kind of segueing into the post-World War II decades. There was this emphasis on breeding crops for enhanced nutritional quality of certain macronutrients that we were discovering as important, and for just maximizing yield. That was kind of why we came up with this system. It is highly efficient within the context of industrialized systems. You can grow a lot of one type of crop on an acre when you pump in and add in all these chemicals. It's simplified management practices for fertility, weed, and pest management, which lends itself to control. And this idea that we can have like recipes and formulas for how much fertilizer and nutrients per acre and how much water, and do some more human optimization functions than what's otherwise possible in a more natural, ecological, and complex system. So definitely initially there's been higher yields on a per crop basis, although we're starting to see that decline as climate chaos wreaks havoc on large acreages of farmland across the globe. And then there's also reduced labor requirements, which is another kind of motivating reason for this system. But we'll talk a little bit more about labor in these different types of farming systems when we get into the comparisons with agroecology. So the environmental impacts of this system, we'll start with these because, sticking with today's theme, it's all connected and part of the same system, really: agriculture, planetary health, human health. And so if we don't have a planet or fresh water on this planet to grow food, all the rest of this, being our healthcare system and our human well-being and potential, starts to fall off. So we are seeing from industrial agriculture a lot of impacts on water quality. This is a picture of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which fluctuates seasonally according to nutrient runoff from the Mississippi River mostly, and that watershed bringing in an excess of mostly nitrogen and phosphorus into the Gulf of Mexico, creating algal blooms, and then loss of dissolved oxygen, and then dead zones that can't support life in this and other bodies of water. So we're seeing the soil erosion and nutrient runoff leading to water quality issues at the same time as the water cycle is disrupted by conventional agriculture. So native plants that might be a part of a local water cycle and create evapotranspiration and clouds that lead to rain are being disrupted by fields that are plowed and left bare for large parts of the year. And it's actually driving a lot of desertification and drought conditions in parts of the world. So definitely impacts on water quality, impacts on the soil. There's definitely a lot of release of carbon to the atmosphere. Agriculture is generally attributed to be contributing 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions, largely through tillage of soil. There's also a destruction of soil life in this process that limits the carbon containing, the ability of soils to sequester and hold carbon and support life, which is kind of at the foundation of biodiversity. So biodiversity is declining in conventional agriculture systems quite significantly. Not a lot of life that can happen in a field that looks like that. Deforestation is another huge environmental impact of conventional ag. There's estimates vary in the literature, but some estimates have shown upwards of 90% of all tropical deforestation is driven by agricultural activities. So that's a huge concern for the environment and biodiversity that depends on forest. There's water, water runoff issues, and also just lack of resilience to extreme events like precipitation extremes that comes from an agricultural system that's lost its soil life. Because life in the soil and carbon event ultimately allows us to hold water. So you see a lot more flooding and runoff because of the destruction of soil life and events like tillage. So you see fields that look like this. And I mentioned desertification and water cycle impacts from conventional ag. So this map shows what's happening with desertification in Spain, which is one of the places we host our course in southern Spain, where it's been particularly damaged. A lot of these trends could be said about California as well, where we're seeing prolonged droughts and wildfires and rainy seasons where it just doesn't rain anymore. And this is a big problem in Spain is facing this problem most significantly on the European continent. So we'll talk a little bit more about efforts to reverse that through bringing back ecological agriculture in just a little bit. So moving into the health impacts of conventional agriculture, how is this affecting people consuming the food? And is this really, solving for hunger and food access issues by growing food in these ways? Maybe initially, but it comes at a cost. So kind of summarizing the impacts by prevalence or weight of evidence, there's pesticide exposure issues that are particularly harmful for farm worker communities, both those working in the fields and those living nearby to agricultural production systems. And that's really well documented by Dr. Kim Harley, who we've been inviting in to speak to our Climate Farm School groups recently. And that leads to outcomes like allergies, asthma, respiratory illness, cognitive delays in youth, and maternal and infant challenges. When one of the studies that she summarized for us is the Tamako study, looking at women and their babies and following them through, I think it's now like 15 or 20 years of age, and documenting impacts on cognitive development and allergies, asthma, respiratory illness. So simplified crops are also driving the prevalence of ultra processed foods. When we have so much corn and so much soy and so much wheat, corn especially is making its way into almost all of our food products in the form of corn syrup and processed foods that are known to drive diet-related diseases when our diet consists of more of these processed foods and less of the whole food itself. So diet-related diseases like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, cancer are increasing tremendously throughout the population, especially in countries that rely on conventional farming systems. There's also research summarizing mental ailments that result from eating overly processed foods. And one of the first studies to document that was Sir Robert McCarrison, in British doctor, who did a study on rats who were fed a processed food diet and a whole foods diet of organically grown or like food free of chemicals that was mostly vegetables and grains and some other non-processed foods. And the rats that were fed the simplified processed white bread diet pretty quickly started to fight and resort to cannibalism. And a lot of those rats died versus none in the other ones. And in particular, he kind of noted the social differences and impacts on the rats, who seemed angry, aggressive, unhappy, wouldn't really move around when they were fed this processed food diet. So that was one of the first threads that people picked up on to look at mental conditions and mental health related to food consumption. Nitrate water pollution, nitrates from nitrogen runoff getting into our water, our drinking water supply, contributes to birth defects, cancer, blue baby syndrome, and thyroid disease. This has been documented by Dr. Christina Balaz and her research team, looking at social disparities in these conditions in the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley, actually, of California. And then nutrient deficiencies in food. So our food is lacking certain micronutrients, phytochemicals, vitamins and minerals that are necessary and important to our human health and immune system. When those micronutrients aren't present in the soil because of lack of soil life, they're not getting into the plants, they're not getting into the animals and humans that consume those plants. And that's really the summary of nutrition studies is really well compiled in David Montgomery's recent book, What Your Food Ate. So that's where a lot of the, great resource to check out if you're curious. So all that being said, it's no longer possible to look at food, livelihoods, health, and the management of natural resources separately. And so the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has been promoting the return to agroecology. It's an old set of practices that has become not conventional in what we call today conventional agriculture, but really these systems have long and deep historic roots. And we're going to talk about what that is. What is agroecology and how it can help us revitalize the people and planet connection. Okay, so agroecology, when I was in grad school, was defined as simultaneously a science, a practice, and a movement. I was informed by Chris Madsen yesterday that it is also now referred to as a trifecta of epistemology, ontology, and movement. But it definitely, in the way it's being defined, conveys an important element of social change. It's not like tweaking the system that we have. It's kind of emphasizing that we need a radical transformation. Some would say, away from what we have now, and others might say back towards practices that existed, before conventional agriculture became common, but still bringing in the modern science and knowledge and technology that we have now. So the FAO defines it as a holistic and integrated approach that simultaneously applies ecological and social concepts and principles to the design and management of sustainable agriculture and food systems. It seeks to optimize the interactions between plants, animals, humans, and the environment, while also addressing the need for socially equitable food systems within which people can exercise choice over what they eat and how and where it is produced. So essentially reconnecting the ecological processes and food production. And we're going to summarize a little bit of the studies and evidence where this is happening and what the results have been, because there's some pretty interesting and surprising effects that are not always expected when we reconnect the ecology and the food production and the people who are a part of those processes. Okay. So I don't know what is happening to my picture here. But hopefully, I don't know if it'll come back up, but what what this was meant to be on this slide so you can kind of visualize is the soil food web. So kind of reminding us that agroecology as a science really starts with soil health at the foundation of the health of the plants that are grown in the soil and ultimately the health of the people eating those plants. So there's the sun, there's the plants, there's the soil life, and that's kind of driving nutrient flows further up into different trophic levels. So just reminding us that our health is connected with the soil, and agroecology spends a lot of time emphasizing the soil health building practices, and there's 5 kind of commonly agreed upon soil health principles. So apologies that soil health diagram didn't come through. Maybe I can send it along later. But so what are the benefits of food production that is following principles of agroecology and soil health? On the environmental side, we see increased resilience to weather and extreme events, to climate induced changes that we're already experiencing. So in Sonoma County, we've been experiencing torrential rain events this winter, where we've had sometimes 20 inches of rain over a period of a few days. Thanks to higher levels of soil organic matter and more carbon in the soil, agroecological systems are able to deal with that moisture coming in high volumes a lot better. And this picture here is Green Valley Farm and Mill, where I live. We have a community garden that's kind of just behind in this photo, and then a 1-acre vegetable CSA farm that's on the land as well. And I was just out there last week after we got 20 inches of rain, and the next day there was no standing water and no runoff coming off the field. So it's pretty amazing to witness that resilience. And also just in terms of economic resilience, there has definitely been crop losses as we get either rain events and flooding at the wrong times or 100-degree heat waves. But if you're diversified and you have 90 crops in the field instead of one, there is some resilience for the farmers in those situations in diversification. I think, yeah, on the environmental side, it's also just worth mentioning that the ability to hold and store carbon is highest in ecosystems that include both forests, trees, and adjacent grasslands and healthy soil. So you're kind of optimizing the land-based carbon flow when you're growing food in a way that keeps native vegetation present. And so most farmers who are practicing agroecology are growing food, and some of the land that they might own or lease is dedicated to the native ecosystem, which is providing ecosystem services in support of the food system. And on the human health side, it is a very different equation to be working in a diversified or chemical-free farm. The working conditions are hard, but they're a lot different on the health implications side than conventional agriculture. There's less exposure to chemicals. It's more knowledge intensive, and so kind of a creative, dynamic process to be an agroecological farmer. There's usually more shade and opportunity to work in safer conditions. And the nutrients that are being held in the soil and cycling through soil life are flowing then into the plants and exchanging between the plant root systems and the soil life, meaning that those crops are often, and animals raised in those systems, containing higher levels of nutrients for the humans consuming them. So that's also the kind of the flip side of the studies documented in What Your Food Ate. So yeah, higher nutrient density food, not just for farmers, but for families that are living either on farms or near farms that are agroecological. There's benefits to youth on the pediatric care side. There's a lot of evidence on the kind of the dirt cure or the benefits of being around farm animals, soil that's healthy and alive, and in reducing asthma, allergies, respiratory illness in kids. So that's kind of the exact opposite of growing up in a conventional farming landscape. Okay, so I'll just pause and see if maybe there are any clarifying questions about the sort of two paradigms of food production, conventional ag, agroecology, and then jump into some case studies. But Vermont, I don't know if you've been monitoring the chat. If there's any clarifying questions, I'm happy to take them now.
Mostly comments, and there was a link to the soil food web that Gina put in so that people.
Oh, thank you. Great. Okay, so we're going to illustrate the sort of outcomes that we've been observing happening and sharing within our Climate Farm School courses at 3 of our host farms and one kind of case study or example from grain farming systems, because I feel like, yeah, grains are an important thing to touch on since they're such a core staple of our diets. But first, we'll talk about Piscinas Ranch, which is in Piscinas, California, and they are famous for designing a new vineyard system that was created by the farm manager there, Kelly Mulville, in response to his observations working in other vineyard systems about the benefits of grazing sheep in vineyards. And he was noticing that sheep can play such a vital role in cycling nutrients, reducing need for irrigation, sort of watering the vines with their urine and fertilizing it with manure. And he was noticing other beneficial effects as well that he didn't initially understand. So then he was wondering why in most climates that are growing grapes that the sheep are actually excluded from being in the vineyard during the time that it's best for them to really be there, when the grass is best for them, and when the vines are growing, it's detrimental to their production if the sheep are munching on the leaves or eating the grapes. So they tend to just be around in the winter when it's just the benefits can't really be maximized. So understanding that challenge, Kelly took it upon himself to design this system where the vines are trained to grow higher and trellised a little bit differently so that the sheep are not able to access most of the leaf growth and the grapes. It's too high up. So the sheep can be in the vineyard grazing the cover crop and the sort of native vegetation that's coming up beneath the vines. And he put this system in place at Piscinas, and they've been trialing it for the past 5 or 6 years and documenting all kinds of results. So what they hoped and expected was that it would lead to soil health benefits. It would lead to two products coming off of the same acreage of, yeah, both sheep raised for lamb and grapes made for wine, or grapes for wine. And they did see soil health benefits. They saw amazing return of biodiversity. There's been birds that haven't been spotted in this area that are showing up, hundreds of different bird species. Um, yeah, soil health improvements, grazing patterns that are really mimicking the systems that were in place there before. And oh yeah, and this is Kelly's other drawing of just summarizing, like, before, what the system that they were trying to replace is very linear, very dependent on imported nutrients from chemicals, fertilizers into plants, and kind of removing the sheep from the equation. But thinking about it, the integration or the connected design, it's really just ultimately powered by the sun and the plants and the sheep, and that's his grazing plan down below in the bottom right. So yeah, what have some of the other unexpected benefits been? So one thing that Kelly found really interesting and has found research to better understand is that sheep saliva actually promotes plant growth. So there's some interesting coevolution between sheeps and vines, and they've had really amazing plant growth, better than they were expecting. And there's apparently some compound in the saliva that is really beneficial, kind of like a magic elixir. This is where I start to be like, it's magic. But they've noticed that. They've been documenting that the sheep are actually doing more of the jobs of the traditional vineyard crews. So they're suckering the little suckers that pop out on the bottom, the base of the vines that you don't want to be there. And one thing that's been really nice as these vines grow up is that the working conditions for people harvesting in the vineyard are it's in full shade because of the canopy being overhead. And so the working conditions are promoting farm crew well-being when it's like 110 degrees and they're out there for hours and there's natural shade. Um, so it's been a really amazing system that they're starting to share with others. And just given the prevalence of vineyard systems in California, I feel like it's really interesting and exciting to imagine a redesign like this that is still promoting yield and promoting, two crops coming off of a landscape, or two products, and promoting better overall working conditions. So this is kind of the evolution from Kelly drawing it, what's happening now, and people working in that system. And one other kind of thing to mention on the benefits side is Kelly and his partner Elaine, who live and work at Piscinas, have been really interested in having their meat tested and doing a nutrient analysis on it. They haven't been able to do that yet, but a study that they shared with me that summarized differences between grass-fed and finished lamb versus conventional was kind of highlighting the less fat in the grass-fed lambs. They're working a lot harder probably. Higher prevalence of good fats like omega-3s, higher micronutrient content, and there was something else. Oh yeah, and better ratios of the things that help us absorb these nutrients into the body. So positive kind of effects that they're curious to take to their own specific herd. Into the future. And I'm not sure how common these nutrient analyses are comparing different types of animal products, but I think that's a really interesting area for further and continued research that farmers that we're talking to are interested in. Okay, so moving into the vegetable production side, this is Singing Frogs Farm. I don't know how many crops you think you can count in this picture, or if anyone sees any bare ground, which I do not. But Singing Frogs Farm is a famous farm up in Sonoma County for adopting fully no-till practices. They converted from tilling the soil occasionally to prepare beds and plant to never tilling their beds at all and replacing one green photosynthesizing crop with another in this innovative system of kind of cutting the old crop out at the soil level and putting transplants in that same day to get another plant in the ground very quickly. They've increased their soil organic matter from 3% when they were tilling the soil, but using organic practices, all the way up to 12% over the past 10 years. And with that increase, they've seen tremendous ecological benefits. And they've done some nutrient analysis with David Montgomery and Ann B. Clay to understand the differences between vegetables grown on their farm and vegetables grown on nearby organic but tilled systems. So this is just a picture of singing frogs from last week. When it rained 20 inches, they have low fields at the bottom that get runoff channeled from a bunch of nearby properties, and they have some ponds down there. So they totally flooded. And then 24 hours, less than 24 hours later, they took this same picture of the same space, and there was, yeah, not really any water. So the water infiltration capacity and just our overall resilience to climate stressors is really impressive to see in a lot of these systems. Elizabeth is a great documenter. Oh, and these pictures don't want to come in either. But this is a picture of carrots and some other vegetables at Singing Frogs. And the study that highlighted the nutrient differences that was conducted a couple years ago was looking at cabbage taken off Singing Frogs and taken off the nearby farm just down the road. And it found there was 40% more vitamin K, 33 to 65% more vitamin E, 8 to 20% more vitamin C, a third more calcium, a fifth more potassium, 50% more zinc and magnesium, and double the phenolics and phytosterols, 50% more carotenoids, and less than half of the sodium in the neighboring cabbage. So that's just some interesting numbers to think about. If we're trying to encourage and support vegetable production, you might need to eat less vegetables, and they'll be more delicious if they're supporting agroecological farms that have beneficial soil health practices. And the citation from that study concluded that soil health seems to matter, particularly for phytochemical levels, which are the part of the plant's immune system that help protect the plant from viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. Phytochemicals can offer humans some of those same protections, as they have antioxidant properties and offer protection that decreases the risks of many diseases. Um, so some really interesting food for thought from Singing Frogs. Elizabeth was actually a nurse working off the farm for the first couple of years that their farm was in operation. So she has a bit of a healthcare background as well, and is eager to talk to people about maintaining health by consuming vegetables from no-till, chemical-free farms. Oh, and I forgot to mention, they feed about 200 families year-round through their CSA and serve farmers markets and restaurants in the area with their produce of just from 3 acres. So on a different scale, we have La Junquera. They are in southern Spain. Their mission as a farm on 2,000 hectares is to reverse the desertification that's happening in their region, which is a really bold goal. And they're working together with lots of other organizations and some farms in the region, and really demonstrating and trying to catalyze a shift in the way things are done at a pretty large scale in southern Spain. So they shifted from just growing grains and some almonds when Alfonso took over the land from his family. He's like 14th generation on this land. A lot of things are a lot older over there. So he started converting it immediately to a diversified set of crops. They're growing aromatics, they're growing drought-tolerant herbs and perennials. They're growing almonds differently in no-till and reduced till and kind of keyline contour plantings. They're resorting to more ancient practices of planting on keyline, digging swales and retention ponds, using stones to hold water around plants when they're being newly established. And in addition to kind of diversifying the landscape, Alfonso and his wife Yannick are hosting ecosystem restoration camps that bring large groups of people to the land to work on native plant restoration and bringing back some of the natural native ecosystem that will hopefully drive a local water cycle again. So it's pretty impressive. And I think on the social side, that just feels amazing here is how many people are being drawn back to this place and to this rural community. Alfonso was alone when he left Madrid, where he'd been studying, and came back to be on his family's land. It was like questionable whether it was going to survive as a farm or be sold, but he was like, no, I want to do this. He was completely alone. The local nearby village had been depopulated by about like 200%, and there was like very, very few people living there, and all the kids in schools were like, I just want to get out of here and go to the city. And he's brought back university researchers. 20 people are now living on the farm. Hundreds of people come every year to learn through their courses or participate in ecosystem restoration camps. And it's just a vibrant community. Now local school children are coming there and spending weeks at a time in their curriculum, learning and being on the farm and trying to be exposed to careers in land and food systems that are very different than they might otherwise have thought about or seen. And it's just amazing that this has like kind of happened in the past 10 years. So always an inspiring place to go and teach and see who's showing up there. Okay, and so the last example that I will bring in, and I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening with some of the pictures on these last slides, but we're going to talk a little bit just about grains. And one example comes from the Skagit Valley in Washington State, where there is this concerted effort to reconnect agriculture around grain systems, planetary and human health at the Bread Lab, founded by Dr. Stephen Jones, who's a plant doctor, PhD from UC Davis. And he created the Bread Lab to really start doing wheat breeding and plant breeding in grains very differently. He has a library of about 3,000 different types of grain from all over saved from all over the world. And he plants these out in field trials in Western Washington to learn about what has the highest nutritional value, the best baking or malting qualities, the best climate resilience to the changes Western Washington is experiencing. He's growing out perennial wheat varieties, he's growing out annual wheats, and he just has this tremendous resilience in his genetic diversity. And his team has now kind of most famously and recently collaborated with King Arthur Flour to create a climate blend of wheat and turn that into a loaf of bread called the Approachable Loaf. That's 5 ingredients, whole grain, milled very differently to preserve all of the qualities of whole grain flour. And is being sold now in stores for less than $3. So the goal was to make the Approachable Loaf affordable and work with a combination of farmers, millers, bakers, food retailers to make that into something that we can now hopefully consume again more equitably, so that these products are not just for the small rural communities or elites that are able to afford premiums on bread, milk, veggie products that are coming from the farms. And then in Big Sandy, Montana, Bob Quinn is doing some similarly amazing work revitalizing an ancient type of wheat called kamut. And he is growing that out organically and has now founded the Quinn Institute on his in his area. Also has been repopulating the small town closest to his farm with people coming back to work in a different kind of food system. And the Quinn Institute is dedicated to healing people through food, through our staple crop grain through wheat. And he is recently on the Regenerative Ag podcast on an episode titled Growing Prescription Quality Wheat. And it's anti-inflammatory. He talks a lot about the ways that it's processed and used to kind of reverse some of the diet-related diseases or allergies and kind of symptoms people are experiencing from wheat and gluten intolerance. So it's not just like that these things like wheat or dairy are causing problems in the human population. It's just kind of how back to the how that they were created, that we have to trace back in our minds. And yeah, so Bob Quinn, Steve Jones, wonderful people in the grain world to reach out to and check out their work. So I'm going to pause here shortly and just prompt us to think about what this all means for the intersection of the healthcare system and the food system. So when we run our Climate Farm School courses, we have everyone who comes through the program come up with an action plan at the end of how they're going to integrate the regenerative farming knowledge, the soil health knowledge into their personal or professional lives. Thinking about this group that you all represent today, I was really trying to get myself thinking, but really want to hear a little bit from you all if you're willing to share what of this resonates with you and your practice. I think would be great to have more doctors and farmers talking to each other. And apparently we have some people in the room who represent both doctors and farmers in one person, which is amazing. And I've heard a farmer who used to be a doctor tell me that they're now practicing preventative medicine by growing the food that they used to be kind of recommending that people try to seek out and eat, but doesn't always feel accessible. So there's a variety of ways that we can all impact the food system. For healthcare professionals, I was thinking about advocacy, purchasing, patient-facing care, And I'm just curious, which of these feel like an opportunity for you all? Like, does it feel accessible to incorporate this into patient-facing care? Purchasing and advocacy, maybe not. Maybe there's less locus of control over, what food is served in hospitals. But yeah, very curious to hear from you all and take any questions as part of our kind of discussion at the end here. And before we do that, I just want to mention that if you do want to come onto a farm and dive more deeply into these topics, we are offering a course at Green Valley Farm and Mill, where I live, in April, that is eligible for CME units for doctors and nursing BRN credits for nurses. So would love to welcome you to the farm. And even if you're not available, we have an interest forum that I'll circulate, or that Ramat has access to. And it'd be great to see who's interested, so we could try to design something again, and maybe shorter and in the time frame and topic areas that doctors really want to see covered. So I will stop there. And
Thank you so much, Laney.
I'll
This is
stop.
excellent. This is probably my favorite talk of the year because I'm also one of those doctor farmers, and appreciate your sharing your experience and how it relates to what we do. And so I put in the chat registration for our annual CME, which is coming up next month, but also the CME that Laney is working with the COEH, our Center for Occupational Environmental Health, to offer CME credit for experiences on the farm. So I highly recommend. I have a friend who did it who's also on this call, which is excellent. And just wanted to highlight some of the things that sort of came through the interconnectedness of transforming agricultural practice and worker health, which is what we deal with here, but we also deal with environmental health and how monocropping, leads to use of pesticides and chemicals that cause disease in populations that we see. And then the effect of like monocropping pesticides, like killing all of the bacteria that make up our microbiota and how that affects health. And so I just wanted to highlight some of those key things that are important. And then I'll leave it to others. I'll just say, I think one of the things that we can do as physicians is just like go and volunteer at a garden or a farm and just have like that firsthand experience. And I see Josh just off mute, so I'm gonna pass it over to the other Dr. Farmer. Okay, not
That was
Josh.
an that was an
Was
accident. Need to
okay,
be off
perfect.
mute. But um, I will say briefly that as a physician, the first time I harvested an animal myself was in Hawaii in 2013, and it was a chicken that we went on to consume. And I will say that I have taught many other people how to harvest animals since then. And even if someone doesn't eat much meat or almost never eats meat, I do think there is something to um, getting your hands dirty with farming, whether it's in the soil with veggies or pulling weeds or fixing fences. I also learned that most of farming is failing and learning by trial and error and pain and losses, whether it's weather, whether it's a fence that you built but you didn't do it quite right, so the sheep got out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Having to put down an animal that was injured, sick, or otherwise. I had an animal attacked by a dog one time. So the range of what you actually learn when you do try to do small scale hobby farming, this was less than 2 acres, is astounding. And then it totally changes your relationship to food. So I don't see how we do this for healthcare professionals without them getting their hands dirty, even if it's not related to animals, because they already don't eat animals and they don't want to participate in that. I understand. Uh, but on the plant side, there's plenty of ways to get your hands dirty and learn more and see, when you go to the farmer's market, I don't haggle at the farmer's market. I give them extra money. I tip them. I see people around me haggling over carrots, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you have any idea how hard this stuff was? And so, yeah, that's my takeaway. And thank you for the talk.
Thanks, Josh. I think Diana had her hand up.
Yeah, I just, kind of writing in on the tails of that. I think that you're talking about when you have a depth of understanding that um, this was sort of hard won, right? Like this resource was hard won. Gratitude, I think, also plays a big role in mental and emotional health. And I think that when you have more appreciation for what it took to bring that to your table, it impacts you in a deep way, and not just your physical way, but your mental and emotional health too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those are both such great points. And I have a lot of conversation with the farmers in my community that go to the farmers market and like want to charge $1 more for their bunch of, kale or carrots that week because it was pouring rain and the crew was short and it took them twice as long to do it. And people, like, every time they do that, someone like says something. So like, I don't know if we can do this, but it's kind of like, whoa, what are we talking about here for a second? And how can we show gratitude for and be in connection with the people growing our food and understand how to do that again in the ways that promote, you know, it seems so oversimplified, but like health from the soil up, the bacteria in the soil, which are billions in even just a teaspoon of healthy soil, more bacteria than there are people on the planet. They're doing a lot for us. And to think that we can like kill all of them and then replace their job is a real real crazy thing in my mind. So I do have some farms up in my general area, and maybe Ramat has others, or we can maybe crowdsource a little bit of list of farms that are open to volunteering and open to having people get engaged. I don't know if many of you want to come up to Sonoma County, but that's where some of my connections are. So I'll definitely provide some follow-up resources on that. The Series Food Project is an amazing one that accepts hundreds of volunteers between their garden and their kitchen, and they're growing and sourcing 100% organic food to make medically tailored meals. They serve Marin, Sonoma, and right now Napa and Solano counties are newly added as well. But there's other great places as well.
Yeah, thanks. And the other thing, I think you mentioned it briefly in your talk, is about sort of this idea of equity and how, how it can be affordable to people. And and I think that's a larger question, and some of the thoughts that I have around that just from reading different books and articles is sort of what you talked about, is kind of like rethinking what our food system looks like. And so that is like, if you can start a garden in your home and like be closer to that connection of food, or go to a community garden that's near you. So I would encourage everyone to look locally, because there are lots of gardens. They're in the East Bay, they're in San Francisco, and I forget the name of the one that I follow in San Francisco, but they have these places, and always there's, if you help harvest, there's always like, oh yeah, like we have extra squash and so take it. So I think that sort of rethinking how it looks, the food system is a big thing.
Totally.
And then there's some comments in the chat, so I don't want to miss those.
Yeah.
Gina, did you want to comment? Oh. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think the equity piece is just really, really important in this whole conversation of transforming and transitioning a food system, because there are, I think, well, yeah, both equitable and inequitable ways to do that. And so approaching the whole shift with a lot of humility and gratitude and recognition of the people doing the work, and including voices of the people that are currently growing the food, will be really, really important. And that seems challenging in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think by bringing ourselves into the equation as like people in relationships with other people growing food and with, land and soil, to even developing our own observational skills about growing food in a garden, can be really, really helpful. So we don't ignore like the humans currently in the system that are like farm workers who are being exposed to pesticides, who are even worried about limiting chemical use on farmland because they're worried they're going to lose their jobs. And so there's just a way of thinking about all of this. And then the food pricing and access pieces. Yeah, I think community gardens are great. And it's like either money or time. It's hard to achieve this really, really good quality nutrient dense food without one investment of either. And that's also hard because a lot of consumers don't have money or time. So yeah, it's a really important conversation to be having in the healthcare setting and in the local food system. But yeah, that's why I really admire the work of Ceres, because it seems like it's solving for a lot of these challenges at once, and bringing medically tailored meals to their clients for a period of up to 6 months, and they've figured out a way to get it reimbursed by Medi-Cal. So it's all happening, but they're the only program of their kind in the country that's providing 100% organic meals for their client population. So hopefully something that can be replicated.
Thank you. Just wanted to open it up for any more questions or comments. Feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. I know we have a lot. Go, yeah,
Go
Paul.
ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to be a little bit more explicit as to the interrelationship between this topic and traditional occupational safety and health that was alluded to in passing. But I think it's all the more incumbent on us in the current political climate where we're seeing a frontal attack on everything that we do at the federal level. I mean, perhaps you could argue that these kinds of initiatives, which are completely detached from the larger political world, is one way of implementing resistance. I don't know. It's not my personal take, but I think it's just critically important that we discuss this head on at this terrible time.
Yeah, definitely. Gina, I know you came off mute. I don't know if you have a question or comment or.
I know we're almost out of time. I just was really interested in, I sort of figured pollinators would be front and center in this presentation, and then it was mostly other stuff, and which was great because I learned a lot. But it's just interested in the sort of the pollinator piece, which is super important as well.
Yeah, thanks for bringing the pollinators. I feel like they like slipped somewhere in my notes or something on the benefits of agroecological systems, and that's key. We wouldn't have a food system without pollinators. I feel like I didn't do justice to seeds really either. Seeds that have been saved for a long time, and yeah, pollinators are a super key part of the biodiversity that supports the food system. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks. And just to come back to Paul's comment, I think it's quite important to be clear. And yeah, there's so many intersections where you think about, pesticide exposures and the ill workers or the illnesses that workers get from living in an area where there's lots of pesticides, which Laney talked about the Chamacos study in Salinas Valley. And so I think just sort of this level of thinking about the system that produced that, then if we could transform that, then there would be less need for these pesticides that could cause serious illness through generations. And then the other thing is like kind of we see farm workers who I think Bob worked on this very many years ago about having a policy for shade and water at the site for people who were exposed. And so directly sort of changing the context of how farming can be done with that case study on, elevating the vines and trellising so that it provides natural shade and improving that. So I think there are definitely like ways that this relates on many levels. And yeah, it's not just like one direct thing. So I'll stop there. I know we're at time. And just want to thank you, Laney, for joining us. Thanks for everyone who joined, and even the farmers and farm lovers who joined across. It was a nice cross-pollination of disciplines.
Yeah, it was lovely to be here and very happy to stay connected with you all. And I'll share a few more resources maybe with Ramat to include in any follow-up, but very open to hearing from you all about how this is weaving into your work.
Yeah, and just to share, the COEH Center for Occupational Environmental Health is working closely with Climate Farms for other opportunities as well. And I met Laney through Dennis Schusterman, who's our emeritus professor, and so that's how this connection came across. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.